Everybody's whispering. This is supposed to be a break, right? What time do you stop? Well, I think I know most everybody here, not everybody. I want to thank you for the invitation coming up. If you don't know me, I'm an amateur at this, so we'll work through it together. I want to kind of explain how the week is going to go first, though. This is going to be somewhat interactive, but just by virtue of the fact that you didn't have anything to prepare for, it's not going to be totally interactive. And it's going to be what I'm going to call task-oriented, not time-oriented. We're going to be constrained by time because I got to stop at a quarter till. But if I get through the things I need to present in 25 minutes, that gives us time to have some conversation. So then during the worship period, it won't be that way, it'll be more a sermon. But after that, it's going to be more of that. We're a little bit interactive. So it's not going to be 5 sermons. Unless you're not talking, then it will be 5 sermons. So what I want to tell you what we're going to do for the week, I was asked, and I thought it turned out to be a little bit more challenging than I thought. It was making good decisions in a bad world. So what we're going to do this morning is we're going to answer a basic question that is the premise for that whole thing. And then we're going to spend the worship period and tonight looking at kind of a decision-making process, if you will. And then tomorrow night, we're going to have a practical exercise on making decisions. And what I mean by that is I'm going to have a series of topics up there, and we're just going to go through it. So if you want to talk about, should I eat chicken or should I eat beef? That's not one of our topics. But if it was going to be one of our topics, we would talk through how you make that kind of decision. But it's going to be things that are, I think, challenging to us as Christians that we face in the world. And then Tuesday night, we'll finish up with talking about what the biggest decision you can make in your life is. So that's what it's all about. So I don't know if you noticed, but I've had this up here the whole time, praising God for his handiwork. Is the world a beautiful place? I think it's awesome. I've been to some neat places. Probably the greatest thing I've ever seen. My son-in-law and I took a trip together to Glacier National Park. We camped for 5 nights in the Outback. It was amazing. It was good fellowship with my son-in-law. We had a great time. And what was funny though is we would stop on trails and be talking to people, and they would be talking to him. They're like, "You're with your father-in-law?" Like, who does that? It was his invitation. But anyway, the world really is, I think, beautiful. Even days like this, we understand why we have weather like this. God gives us seasons so that we can have different things develop. Spring is coming. It's all for a reason. But recently, I read this article that was in the Journal of Positive Psychology. Let me just make sure things are advancing. And the title of this article was, "Parents think incorrectly that teaching their children that the world's a bad place is likely best for them." So I'll repeat, that parents teach incorrectly that teaching the world is a bad place is likely not the best for them. So they talk about primal beliefs, things that are like the basic beliefs to you. And they found that among 185 parents, 53% refer dangerous world beliefs for their children. Now, what are we talking about? Do you tell your kids, like when I taught my kids to drive, I said, I don't want you to drive defensively. I want you to drive as if everybody in the road is intentionally trying to kill you. All right, so what kind of mindset does that create? Don't talk to strangers. You load your kids with all the bad things that can happen to them, is what we tend to do as parents. So as they went through this research, they found that they did 3 national samples and 3 local samples, and I wasn't able to figure out what they meant by the difference in that. But they talked to undergraduates, immigrants, African, Korean, and they talked to professionals, and you see what they consider professionals up there. Examine the correlation between the primals, that the world is bad, and 8 life outcomes. So what was the effect of this teaching that things were bad? Well, as predicted, now was there some bias in the research? If they say as predicted, but they had a hypothesis, so they went into it. They say as predicted, that regardless of the occupation, whether you're a professional, whatever it was, that a more negative primal was almost never associated with a better outcome. So maybe my daughters are horrible drivers because I was giving them that negative. Actually, they're not all horrible, but 2 of them are pretty bad. Instead, they predicted less success, less job and life satisfaction, worse health, dramatically less flourishing, and they don't define what flourishing is there, more negative emotions, more negative depression, and increased suicide attempts. So this is what they're saying. If you teach that the world is a bad place, that this is going to be the result. Do you think that's accurate? I see some saying yes, some saying no. I think it probably is accurate. But there's something missing from their study. What do you think it is? God. Because what happens on this world is not our final look to things. If I focus just on this world, the United States is becoming a cesspool. It's a bad place. But so is Europe. So is Ecuador. So is, and we're going to talk about what's bad and what's good later on. So if you focus on purely the negative, then you'll develop a negative outcome unless you have something else to look forward to. Right? So I think that's probably what's missing in it. But we got to be careful about that. Because if we give too many negative messages to our children, what are they going to think? That everything's just bad? And does anybody want to be around somebody that's negative all the time? I don't. Negativity drags you down, but it's a whole lot easier to be negative than it is to be positive. Have you ever noticed that in life? It's in your workplace and it's just easy to complain. It's easy. It takes no effort to complain because you can always find something bad. So let's answer the first premise of this whole thing. Is the world a bad place? What do you think? So the premise was, if you teach a negative message, is it good or bad? So I heard this was your idea, and you're saying it's not a bad place. You wanted me to teach on making good decisions in a bad world. You're saying it's not a bad place?
It's okay.
It's full of bad people is what he's saying. Okay. So that's one of the distinctions we're going to make. Is what do we talk about? So we got to define our term first of all, right? What is the world when we talk about it? Well, if we set our mind on things that are above and not on things that are on the earth. So that's the first thing we're looking at. There's things that are above. Well, what are some of the things above? Are there physical things in the spiritual realm? No, but it says there's things, and not on things that are on the earth. So there's our first distinction, I think. Even though we know that there's times that God uses the term earth and world interchangeably, we're going to define it for our purposes for this next few hours. Not right now, hours, but coming up. So what we want to look at is this. If we look at 1 John 2:15, I invite you to turn there if you like. We're going to come back to this thought regularly. It says, do not love the world or the things in the world. So there's that word again, things. Do not love the things in the world. For the love of the Father is not in him. I'm going to pause on that verse right now because we're going to come back to it. But once again, we see that if we're focusing on the world and the things in it, then we don't love the Father. Now, was there anything wrong with me focusing on the mountains in Glacier National Park? No, as a matter of fact, that's an opportunity for praise. So what kind of things are we talking about? We're going to get to that as we go through. And then here's another important one. I think everybody knows this verse. Even people that go to sports games know this because the guy holds up the card, right, and then they get curious what it is and break out their phone. What's John 3:16 say? For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. If you think back to creation, when God created things, what was his response to the things that he had created? He saw that it was good. He created something, he looked, and he saw that it was good. He liked it. So now we're talking about the world, and he loves the world, but there's that word, whoever. And this gets back to what you're saying. It's not the physical thing. Even though the creation he saw was good, the love that Jesus had was not for the mountains. It wasn't for the lakes, the streams, the rivers, the trees. That's not the love we're talking about. Because they, even though we're told in the Bible that creation would scream out the glory of God, and it does, but audibly, but we're talking about somebody that can love. I don't think a leaf is capable of love. There's people that tell me I'm wrong. But people are capable. So let's look again at this. And this is kind of a long reading. If you would, turn with me there to John 1, because we're going to read this whole section. See if we're on the right side. All right, John 1, we're going to read 13 verses from it. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. Now you see that, I'll pause there for just a second. So he made everything. But in him was life, and life was the light of men. So what we're seeing here is a change from the physical to the spiritual. That the light that was in Jesus was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all may believe through him. He was not the light, but he came to bear witness about the light. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. Now let me ask you a question here. When John was talking about the light that was coming, was Jesus already there? Yeah, he was already alive. He was already walking around. It says the light was coming into the world. Sometimes I think in my own mind, and I may be off on this, that I have this image of when Jesus was born, that was the light coming into the world. And it was. Born this day was a Savior. But it says here that John said the light was coming into the world. When did the light start to reveal itself to the world? Well, it came. His first miracle, he started to reveal himself in the light and the hope and the love that he was bringing. So John wasn't talking about the fact that Jesus was born. He was talking about that he is getting ready to bring light to the world. I don't know if you ever have that confusion in your mind. I do. When I think about the light coming in the world, I always go back to the birth of Jesus. But when John was proclaiming that light was coming, Jesus was already there. Maybe that's being too picky. Anyway, now we'll start back again with verse 9. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. So, are we talking about trees didn't know him, rocks didn't know him? No, people did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor the will of flesh, nor the will of man, but of God. So when we talk about all things that were made through him, that's everything, but we focus on the fact that it says the world did not know him. So again, we're talking about people. So I'm going to make a proposition for the rest of our class. My proposition is that the world means people. We're going to define it that way because the world can mean things. It can mean this table, because that's part of the world. But we're going to, for the purposes of our discussion from here on out, the world is going to be people. Well, what about these things that we're talking about? What are the things? If the things above and the things that Jesus loved and the things of the world, if we love the things of the world, there's nothing wrong with loving your lawn, is there? And trying to keep your grass nice. There might be. And we're going to talk about that later on, because keep this in mind as well. are there truly any decisions or things that have no moral value? Does this matter morally? Maybe, maybe not. That's the kind of things we're going to talk about. But if that's our proposition, and it says that do not love the world or the things of the world, we're not talking about the slide change or the loan. What are we talking about? Look what it says. For all that is in the world, and then it says desires, and pride. That's what it's talking about. If you love your desires, if you love your desires for the things of the flesh, the things for the eyes, if your pride is something that you love, that is loving things of the world. And then the Father is not in you. And again, we're going to keep coming back to that because that needs to drive a lot of what we do. So now, the question was making good decisions in a bad world. So I think we still haven't decided if the world is bad or not, because we had a lot of nodding and yesing and kind of guessing and all that. But let's start with good. What does it mean for something to be good? Well, Jesus, in this context, was talking to people about different teachings and how you should view the world, all these different things. And then in Mark 10:17, let's go there together. We're going to read 17 through 22. So he had been talking about divorce and temptations to sin, all these different things. And then a rich young ruler comes to him. And in verse 17, Mark 10:17, it says, and he was setting out on his journey. A man ran up to him and knelt before him and asked, good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus said to him, why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone. You know the commandments. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness. Do not defraud. Honor your father and mother. And he said to him, teacher, all these things I have kept from my youth. And Jesus, looking at him, loved him and said to him, you lack one thing. Go and sell all that you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And come follow me. Disheartened by the saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. And Jesus looked around and said to his disciples, how difficult it will be for those who have wealth to enter the kingdom of heaven of God. Now, let me ask you this. Is Jesus good? But what did he say? Okay, so how can Jesus be good if only the Father is good? Have you ever tried to think through that? Because Jesus said only the Father is good. But then he tells this rich young ruler what to do to please the Father. Good works that he should do. If you look through the Old Testament, God was all about the poor and the helpless. Over and over and over. About helping the poor and the helpless. I think what Jesus is pointing here is that there is nothing good unless it emanates from God. So Jesus himself, as we're going to see later on about how he made his decisions, everything was about God. If it's good, the source of that goodness is God. I think that's his point in that. Because Jesus, why would Jesus want people to follow him if he's not good? He wasn't saying he wasn't good. He's saying that the source of good is God. I hope that makes sense. But whether it does or not, we're moving on. So, then also in Philippians 4:8, here's some things. It says, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, so truth and justice, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. So God, who's the source of goodness, would not ask us to put our mind on things that are not good. And then in Micah 6:8, we're told what God wants. He has told you, O man, what is good. And it's to do justice, to love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. So that's three things right there you can say for a fact are good. to be just in the way you deal with other people, to love kindness, to be kind to people, and to walk humbly with God. So when we put that all together, this is how we're going to look back at this several times and say, this is what goodness is. This is the list of good things. And it's not, obviously, it's not all encompassing. But we're going to say that it's God, following God, truth, purity, honor, justice, kindness, and humility. Now that's a good list. How would you like to have that to be on your tombstone? This is what I thought about Jim. That he followed God and he did these things. I think anybody in the right mind would look at somebody like and say, he was a good person. And we should want to be good. We should want our decisions to fall in this list of good, I would hope. So now back to our question. Is the world a bad place? Okay, seeing head nods. So if goodness was that, all those things that we just listed, truth, what is America doing with truth right now? It's out. And I'm not even talking about biblical truth. I'm just talking about simple facts. It's fine. What about purity? So I'm going to try to be delicate, but there's a popular pornographic website. I didn't know anything about this until I watched the video. It was a high school band was playing at a basketball game, and the drummer did some kind of like riff that is associated with music to a porn site. Everybody in that crowd, to include the parents, laughed and applauded. Everybody. There wasn't a single person that had a look on their face like, what was that? Or, I can't believe they're clapping for that. So what is the world think in general about purity? They don't care. Honor. Justice. Is our justice system just? Far from it. Okay, so you could just stop and say everything opposite of that is bad, but we're not going to stop. We're going to look at some other things. We're going to go through and we're going to talk about what is bad. This verse bothers me that we're going to look at in just a second here because, and just tell me if you ever struggle. Do you ever look at yourself? And I've had I'll say a less than good past. Okay, so sometimes I look at my heart and I'm like, there's nothing good in my heart. I feel that way even to this day sometimes. And then I read this verse and it makes me feel that even more. That the heart is deceitful above all things, is desperately sick. That's a scary verse. If that's our nature, and this is biblical truth, that the heart is desperately sick. And here's how the Bible uses that desperately sick. To be incurable, to be sick. To be woeful, to be very sick. If that's the nature of our heart, we're in trouble. There's a thing I like to say, and you guys I think will appreciate this. So I used to say all the time in classes, and I still believe it. If there was no God, if there was no limits to what I do, if I had nothing to restrain me, I think I'd be a pirate. Because then I could just do what I want, take what I want. If you have it, you're not willing to give it to me, I'll just kill you. Who cares? Who cares? If there's no God. You might say, well, that's not the right way to live. I was like, well, that's your opinion. But I'm taking what I want. So I was teaching a class one time, and I happened to mention in that class, I teach in Romans, that Dad had a hook. And I was joking around. I said, but I don't have daddy issues. And this girl says, you want to be a pirate and your dad has a hook. She said, I think you have daddy issues. So I told her, I said, that is the best comment I have ever had. But I honestly feel that way. If I weren't constrained by something else, who knows what I would be like. I know what, and you need to know yourself. You really do need to know yourself. I tend towards violence. I don't know why. Just the way I'm built. I don't know. Kim, when we were young and married, there's times I I got out of the car at intersections, was heading to the car in front of me. Probably get beat up pretty bad, but and it took me a long time to get that behind me. You know, she's rolling her eyes like, you know, he hasn't really. No, I don't think I'm a violent. What does Proverbs say about a violent man? Stay away from him. You know, I don't want to be that person. So I have to work on it. But if our heart is desperately sick, if that's the way we are, then again, we're in trouble. Unless we have some outside help. What do you think about that statement? Do you look at the world? Now, when I say look at the world, be careful because we're part of that, right? Our desires, the things that we desire of the flesh, the things that we desire with our eyes, our pride. Can we be desperately sick? Yeah, and I think that's what leads to a lot of the darkness that we see.
That's why we needed Jesus.
Exactly. And that's where we're going to end up at the end of every class and at the end of every sermon. Let's go to 2 Timothy 3. 2 Timothy 3. We're going to read 1 through 5. 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 5. But understand this, that in the last days there will come difficult times, or times of difficulty. Are we in difficult times? Here's another thing we got to be careful about. Kim used to get on to me about this a little bit. I would tend to paint a negative picture for my kids. Do you think we're worse off than Noah was? No. I don't. I think there's a lot of good people in the world. There's a guy at work that is an avowed atheist who's one of the best moral people I've ever known. He helps people. He's considerate. He's probably the most thoughtful guy I've ever been around. We had a young guy at work got killed in an accident, and this guy knew something about him. This young guy had anybody know what a hydroponic pot farm is? Okay, he had that in his garage, and Sparky calls me. That's this guy. He's like, we got to get over there and get that stuff out of this. I don't want his parents seeing that. This kind of guy he was. And we cleaned up his house. I mean, I would have never thought of doing that myself. But this guy's an avowed atheist. So there's a lot of good people out there. Look at, Noah didn't have this many people around him. So when we think we're in the worst times ever, we're not. But we think in our own time frame. Some of the stuff that we're seeing now, you go back 20 years, it would have been unimaginable. But 20 years ago, 20 years prior to that, would have been unimaginable. It just keeps going. But there's been times in history that are far worse than now. If you know anything about the history of England, the history of North Carolina, you talk about murderous, raping people. That because the heart is desperately sick. So let's get back to verse 2 of 1 Timothy 3. For people will be lovers of self. And as we go through this, think about yourself. Lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive. Kids, listen up. Disobedient to their parents. Ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable. What does that mean, unappeasable?
Can't satisfy.
Never satisfied, and if something's wrong, you can never make it happen. They cannot be appeased.
This is irreconcilable.
Yes. So unappeasable is if you've done something to make them happy, they will never be satisfied with anything you offer them. They cannot be appeased. You ever know anybody like that? You ever been like that? People are trying to apologize to you and you're just not taking it. Slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good. Remember our list? They look at that list and they don't love anything on it. Treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit. Lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. having the appearance of godliness, but denying its power. Avoid such people. Now, here's the caution for us. We look at that list and we're like, oh, yeah. Especially even when I started, this thought came in my head. And you'll find that a lot. Thoughts come in my head. I just talk. All right, so the one that talks about lovers of pleasure and lovers of God, immediately what came to my mind was there's people that go to soccer games and fish on Sunday morning. They don't love God. I'm here. I love God. They're at the soccer tournament. Be careful about that. Don't say this is a list about other people. This is a list about us. This is a list about our desperately sick heart and where we would be saying, "Arr," everywhere we go if we weren't constrained. We had a young lady at church, made no bones about it. She was leaving because she wanted to be sexually promiscuous. She divorced her husband, quit her job, expressly stated she wanted to be sexually promiscuous. That was her goal in life. I told her, I said, well, I appreciate your honesty. I can't agree with anything you're saying to me right now because I think you're heading for a disaster, but I appreciated her honesty. I think there's a lot of people that hide that in themselves. And then Mark 7 says, for from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. How many times has pride made the list? I think just about every time. All these evil things come from within and defile a person. So, what if we just stop there today? You guys are horrible people, get out. You know, we would feel like, what hope is there in the world? And we should feel that way, actually. What hope is in the world? So let's establish some things. For the rest of the time that we're talking, we're going to come back to this list. Not regularly, but these are things we want to keep in mind. That good is that list of things that we checked off. And then bad is just this list. That's just one list. How many good things can you find in the Bible? Tons of them. But I just made this one short list. How many bad things can you find in the Bible? It seems like a lot more. So we tend to think of the Bible as a something that constrains us and keeps me from having fun as a list of do's and don'ts. Is the Bible a list of do's and don'ts? It really is, in a lot of ways. But, and you don't have to raise your hand, so I'll do it for you. If you've lived bad, and you've lived where you're trying to be, if you've lived bad and you just didn't care, and you lived good where you're trying to live, which was better for your life? Well, for me, it was trying to live good. Now, there's challenges that come with that. We'll talk about that. But for me personally, it makes me wonder, is my heart just darker? You know, the atheist guy? I think my heart is darker than his because he's a good person. I've got a good friend at work. He asked me one time, not too long ago, he's Catholic. He said, do you think I'm wrong for not going to Mass? And I said, well, do you believe what the Catholic Church teaches? And he said, yeah. I said, then you should probably be going to Mass. You know, we just had a good discussion. But he's not a bad person. And as we discussed it, I'm thinking the whole time we're talking, it's like, I'm so much worse than he is. Because if he spends his time doing good things with his family and all that, and if I just did what I wanted to do, I mean, I wouldn't have a ship. I might have like a big giant truck with guns on it or something, you know, but because I don't want to be in the middle of the ocean. There's sharks there. But what I'm trying to get us to establish right off the bat is our pride in being good can be the very thing that brings us down. And we got to remember the nature of man and our total dependency on someone other than ourselves. So, now, is the world a bad place? If it comes out of the heart, what comes out of the heart? the wickedness, all those things that we just talked about. What did we say was the world? It's our desires. It's the things that we value is what makes the world. So this is what is going to be our definition of the world and our view of it, that the world is bad. Now again, and I'm especially sensitive to children, I don't want to depress them. I don't want to walk out and what's the point? I'll be proud of it. It's okay to be tired. Don't if you remember one thing, please don't let that be it. All right. So, but for our discussion, we're going to say that the biblical world is the people in it and the desires that are opposed to good. That's what we're going to work on. And then the rest of the time, we're going to talk about, well, if that's our surroundings, how do we make good decisions when we're surrounded by that? How do we make good decisions if my heart is desperately sick and woeful and leans to evil? How do I make a good decision about anything I'm going to do? If that's what my heart is all about. So hopefully we'll go through a process. I'm not going to give you like a little chart you got to pull out of your pocket. What if I should turn left or right up here? Hang on a second. So it's not going to be. I actually know a guy that taught a 4-hour seminar on biblical decision making. I know this guy. He's a research scientist, and when he started talking through this process, I was like, "That's not what I'm going to give you. I'm not giving you anything that's like, okay, I've got a decision tree and I got to follow this matrix and yep, it's yes, I got to go this way. It's no, I got to go that way. That's not what this is about. All right. So we got just a few minutes left. So a comment was made. That's why we need Jesus, and that's the whole point. I'm going to offer some form of invitation every single time. And what I want to make clear is this, that I personally wouldn't care, the elders might have a different view. I wouldn't care if it was in the middle of a sermon and somebody said, I need to be baptized right now. We would stop and baptize them. I wouldn't care if it was in the middle of a song. Somebody said, I got to make a confession because I haven't been living right. You need to stop and do it. So if at any point in any of this, you're like, man, I've given myself over to that desperately sick part. Instead of looking at the things that are good of God, I got to make some changes, then do it. All right, so that's it. Anybody got any comments before we go?
Hey, where was your Jeremiah? What passage was that?
I think it was Jeremiah 1. Yeah, let me get that.
17.
Yeah, I was wanting to say 1:9. I knew there was a 1 in there. But yeah, that verse does bother me. I think about it a lot. Because well, there's a good question for you. We can spend a couple minutes on it. Is that really the nature of man? I said it was. Do you agree with that? That that's really the nature of people? That we would just be rotten scoundrels? See some head nod.
I think if you go back and look at what man gave himself over prior to Noah and the flood, that's what man turns into without some kind of moral thing that brings him back. So, a lot of times we talk about it and say, well, we shouldn't say that. Well, I'm just a man.
Yeah.
Or I can do that. I have faults because I'm just a man and man is weak. But God gives us a way. I think God had given them a way, but they rejected it and they became purely evil.
Yeah.
So without something restraining us, I think that's where the world goes. And I think that's what you see in society. The restraints have been taken off.
Yeah. The thing that I lose sometimes is we do have inherent value there. Because why would Jesus die for us if we weren't worth dying for? So don't get so caught up in that feeling, because I get that way all the time. And we're going to talk that there is just nothing good in me. I'm irredeemable. There's no value in me. Well, that can't be true.
We have potential.
Yes. And not only that, my soul is worth more than every physical thing in the world.
And that goes back to the John 3:16.
Yeah.
And you go back to creation, everything he did, even man, but at the very end, he said it was very good.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah.
So everything was good, but at the end it was very good. And
Why?
that included man.
Yeah.
Because there was a purity to man at that time.
And that's an interesting point, because as God saw these beautiful things, is that a hand? I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. I was just gonna say that for Christians, once we are baptized and we arise, that new creature, that new man, that's a new heart
Yes.
also. And so I think as Christians, we can't just say, well, I'm a man, I've got this uncurable heart. This uncurable heart can be cured through Jesus. And so I think we have to put ourselves in a different category than the world. And we have to also consider that we are in the world. So we define the world also in its badness and its goodness.
Right, and we're gonna talk about that Tuesday night, being in the world but not of the world. And so, but remember, the things that drive the world are what's in us. And that's a tough one. We're gonna talk about a little preview about how do you let go of that guilt? How do you let go of the thought that your heart is just despicable? How do you see yourself as having value if all this badness is around us and we would just be part of it? So we'll stop there.
Very good.